Working for Getty, one of the biggest photo agencies in the world, let's talk about something controversial. Megapixels. Megapixels. How many do you need?
More is always good, but not at the cost of the image quality and the final product. But the R1 and the file size at 24 megapixels is very, very good. It's got that extremely good balance between file image quality, file size, ability under high ISO, as we know is, let's be honest, there's no point in having a massive file if the quality falls apart when you're shooting under floodlights.
So for sports, you find the balance of size with the ISO performance and frames per second, that whole kind of combination is super important for you.
Yes, yeah. It's about the end, that end file size. It has to be, you have to remember, is we're transmitting pictures as well. So, if you're transmitting on a extremely fast network, great, but you're not always, a lot of the time you're relying on cell phone coverage or something like that. So you try transmitting a 60 megapixel file compared to a 24 megapixel file, quite a lot of difference.
But obviously the R1 has that unique kind of magic feature because the upscaling.
The upscaling, yes.
And I remember, people saying you can do that in workflow after the post, but obviously when we showed it to you guys, you were kind of blown away by it.
Yeah, and the image quality is just absolutely fantastic. So, you're not shooting natively in what would be that file size, but when you have a file that you need to have a bigger version of, or if you're going to crop into a file, example is say like a manager down the sidelines and you haven't got time to put a 1.4 converter on, or a goal at the wrong end, and you just need to give the editors a bigger file to work with.
So this obviously people say, well, why can't I do that afterwards in my software? I can upscale. Can you tell us?
Time. It's just not time. The industry we work in is a lot of it's based on speed. To have that baked into the camera is brilliant, absolutely fantastic.
The question I always get is, what's the maximum ISO you would use?
So it's an interesting one. It's what's the maximum ISO I would use,
yes,
and what's the maximum ISO the camera is capable of, and still maintain the image quality that I want to have.
Exactly.
I would very rarely creep above 4000 ISO.
Okay.
Almost always shooting wide open. I'm almost always shooting around, anywhere between 1600th of a second and 2500th of a second, depending on the situation. So under modern floodlights, even poorly lit modern stadiums, 4000, maybe 5000 ISO does the job.
Yeah.
But the fact that 8000 ISO is fantastic and perfectly acceptable and gives a phenomenal image quality is just great, and the camera can go way above that.
I think it's also important to remember in sports photography is that you have to use a certain shutter speed to freeze the action. And obviously the other downside is the higher the resolution, the higher the shutter speed that you need to do to achieve the same effect.
And this is something that
which then impacts the ISO.
Yeah, it means you're, say if you're a very large megapixel camera in poor light, there's a lot of factors going against the quality of your end product.
Yeah, so even though it has more megapixels, it may not actually end up with more detail.
No. Going into something else I'm sure we'll talk about, which is around high frequency anti-flicker.
Well, we'll get to that.
Yeah. But that affects how I use the camera and how I use ISO. So I'm sticking with a constant shutter speed most of the time, sticking with a constant F number. So I'm using ISO to change my exposure. In certain scenarios, auto ISO is your friend.
Yeah.
You can't help it sometimes. Certain stadiums, you could have a 4 or 5 exposure drop, and because you're moving quickly from one to another, you let auto ISO do its job. Yeah. It's really good.
Yeah, well,
it's really good.
One customization I found recently was kind of assign a button to ISO.
Yes.
And then once you've got that, when you press it up, if you press info it comes straight back to auto.
That's exactly.
So you can have the wheel to dial in your ISO manually, and then you have that shortcut that you get you back to the auto.
Yeah.
And again, also going into the custom settings and turning off the auto metering ISO settings, set it to off, stops it from jumping back to auto every time. I think that's a function I know a few people have got. Okay. You mentioned anti-flicker, and there are two
Yes.
types of anti-flicker in the
Yes.
camera. Original anti-flicker is the fluorescent tubes you tend to get in gymnasiums, etc., and they will actual cycle. So they'll actually get brighter and then darker. The eye doesn't see it, but if you're shooting at a fast enough shutter speed, you end up with either banding or basically one image is dark, one image is light. So we have these anti-flicker detection systems. In fact, the new firmware version 1.10 for the R1 will actually warn people when they detect this more often. And turning it on changes the frame rate, so it puts it into sync with those lights. But the other type of flicker, which is a new thing for digital cameras really, is that the high-frequency LED.
Yes.
And I know it's been a bane
Yes.
for yourselves.
Well, I mean, when we first tested the R3, we kind of stumbled into it, didn't we? Because let's be honest, we were like, oh, it's brilliant. Yeah. When we've tested cameras, we always go through certain scenarios. But the new improved high frequency anti-flicker in the R1, I mean, it was in the R3, but now improved into the R1 with much finer sort of frequencies in between.
I think that combined with the faster readout of
Yeah.
the sensor, this has got the fastest readout of any sort of camera apart from a global sort of sensor. So therefore, the chance of it occurring is reduced. Plus then the settings on top of that.
Yeah, and it's something that you kind of find quite quickly is it's almost become one of those things that I do when I go to a football ground. Is what's the first things I do? Well, I test my network connection, I test my cable, everything's sending fine. I then look, the LED boards are on. I will then go and find, can I shoot at 2000th of a second? Are these, because some LED boards are fine. They don't seem to.
I think it's the different manufacturers. Which
Different
one of the
manufacturers, and also they're getting better.
Yeah.
They are getting better. But, with TV, you might see different ads depending on the frequency, which is, I think, why sometimes when ads change from one to another on an LED board, you might see a bit of breakup. But yeah, so one of the first things I do is I then either go and I'll test the frequency of the LEDs and I'll find the one that works for that stadium. So I might be at, say, was it 2048 point something of a second or 1919 of a second, or and some are better than others. Some you have to have a couple depending on the angle that you're shooting. But it's eliminating that banding, and it's just a small thing. When you look back at a picture, you really don't want to see that horrible banding and line. It just don't look good. And all top venues use LED boards now because it's just the way things are done. The Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, the background to the medal ceremony was a massive LED board. And funnily enough, the only mirrorless camera that could eliminate the banding was the R3.
So shooting menu, a few of the little settings to talk through. Have you ever played with the Metering Detect AE, which is another feature of the R1?
I haven't.
Oh, okay. This is another one, again, where because the AF system's so advanced now with focusing on people and animals, etc., it links that focus point to the metering. So wherever that focus point is, that's where the metering is really taking place. And that's why we're seeing the improvement in exposure for skin tones, whether it's light or dark, because it's detecting the subject and biasing the metering towards that particular thing, because that's the most important thing.
So it's
very similar to the spot.
Like I was about to say, it's working like a spot metering that's moving to the subject that you're focused on.
Yeah, in the old 1DX3, we had link spot to metering.
Yes.
This is a more advanced version of that because we're now looking at recognizing the subject, not just saying
I'm now going to turn this on. So it's the good thing about these things, you see. We actually find things and mess around with them. And
so picture styles.
Picture styles, yes. Your workflow is really, really important here. Our workflow, 90% of what I shoot is remotely edited for me by editors, cloud-based, whether they're sitting in an office, but essentially I'm sending them the JPEG. If I'm working with another photographer at the same venue and we're shooting different picture styles, it creates more work for them, the editors. So, if we have one photographer or we have 10 photographers shooting the same event, when you, as a customer, you look at the content, everything should look the same color balance. Everything should look, relatively, if it's shot from the same-ish angle or whatever, it should look uniform, or it should look easy. And one of the really important things is making sure that our editors have a file that is very neutralish to use. They can make the adjustments on a very large calibrated screen, and they haven't got to spend ages messing around trying to get dialing the contrast back in or dialing the saturation down, because it's like photographers decided that they want to pump something and make it look super contrasty because it looks good. Well, yeah, it might look good in the EVF or on the back of the screen, but it makes it hard to edit, and also maybe less attractive to a client. How do you make things fast to get your picture from camera to client? Well, make the editor in the middle do less work, make their life easier.
Yeah. And also what appeals to the customer at their end, what jumps off the page, what makes them choose that image over something else. Yeah. Moment timing is one thing, but there's colours and everything else.
It's easy to, if, for example, you want something shot in a certain way, you can create a profile if that's what that client's asked for. If you have 4 photographers doing the same thing and you need to, put something, you need it to all look a certain way, the editors can deal with that in that middle process.
Talking about bringing things back, panning assist.
Yes.
So panning assist with version firmware 1.10 for the R1.
Yes, it's back.
We've brought the panning assist back from the R3, which was a much missed feature from motorsports guys. Ever use it for other things?
Or? So I've used it for use it for football.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're doing it, if anything you're panning, winter sports, you used it on athletics. It's literally, if you're doing any panning, turn it on. It's a no-brainer. It's another one of these features that is a no-brainer. This is going to keep coming up many times. Little features throughout the camera that just help you do your job. Yeah. And this is another one of them.
And maybe people don't understand what it's doing, but basically, as you stop panning, it's using the IS system to detect the movement in your technique, and it's then stabilizing the sensor in the up and down position, but allowing it to move left and right to kind of keep the subject as central in the frame as possible, or wherever you've started on it. So it recognizes the subject and recognizes the movement of it, and will actually, the IS is actually helping you in smoothing out and keeping the object in the frame. So you're going to get a hit rate of, if you keep the same shutter speed that you would normally use for panning, I think your hit rate goes up by about 60%.
That's a good hit rate.
It's a good hit rate. And then if you're using 2 stops slower, you'll get the same hit rate as you did previously. So you can use a much slower shutter speed than previously. And I think the R1 is about 20% better than the R3 in the same sort of movement. So,
which was already fantastic.
Another big topic for sports photographers. Yeah. A thing you would love to talk about. White balance.
I keep things very basic and very simple for the same reason of using the standard camera profile, make life easy for the people who are editing the pictures. So in terms of white balance, if I'm working with another photographer, we'll say, hey, what we're using. I mean, under floodlights, I choose a Kelvin. Then under daylight conditions, I generally flip between sunny and cloudy. I may use a Kelvin sometimes. I mean, so depending on the country you go to, sometimes daylight could be a bit cold.
Okay.
So you find you just have to, use Kelvin and knock it up a little bit. And in the same respect, like cloudy could be too warm.
Yeah.
So you have to use like a Kelvin between the two. Experience tells me to use my eye and look at the picture. And then sort of use the EVF.
Yeah.
Is the best method. I think you can really see what it looks like.
How many frames per second do you shoot at? Is too many frames per second too much?
One of the improvements on the R1 over the R3 is the fact that it's now customizable.
Yep.
Obviously, initially, it was lots and lots.
Yep.
And you couldn't sort of have ones in between.
No. So the R3 was 30 frames per second. This is now 40, But as you say, there are those sub steps in between.
So I generally switch between. I have my, we're going to call it H plus.
Yep. H plus is the highest. Yep.
I have that set at the works, everything 40 frames
40 frames a second. Yep.
And I use that in certain situations, but that's not my everyday frames per second that I use. My everyday's 20, so I set the one below that
H
to 20.
Yep.
And I set the one the low one to about, I think it's set to about 10, 8 or 10.
Okay.
So say if I'm doing some work with Flash, or doing presentation pictures, and obviously you don't want it to be blown away and give it. So it's just to drop that down to the 8 or 10 frames per second gives the Flash a chance. It's more than enough. You're getting the pictures you need, and then makes life a lot easier to go back through those. But generally, my day-to-day, in fact, I'm between two actually. So what I would say shoot my 400mm on is on 20, and I could flick it up to 40. You can put it on a button.
Yeah, you can do a burst mode where you can hold down the button and it would jump to the H plus.
Yeah.
So you set the H plus, as you say, to 40 or 30, whatever you want to be the highest, and then shoot primary in H. And then when you hold the button, it can be an emergency jump into that frame rate, let go, and it goes back down to again.
But the 40 is impressive. I mean, the 40 doesn't miss anything. It really doesn't.
Sure.
And I think what probably isn't lost is the more frames per second, the more data you're recording. Again, with the 24 megapixel chip, even if you shoot in RAW and JPEG, I've not hit a buffer on a decent card at all, which is not the case with sort of other colleagues on other systems with larger megapixel cameras.
So you have to time when you start your sequences because
totally. They're hitting buffers on cards and cards that are good, decent cards.
Yeah, and I suppose the problem is if it hits towards the end, that could be where the key part is.
Yeah, exactly. So
the other thing when we tested the R1 that you were excited about was the pre-capture. So the question to you: witchcraft or a good thing?
It's a good thing.
Good thing.
Yeah. It is witchcraft, but it is a good thing. It's one of the things we tested was putting it on a low frames per second and holding down the half press.
Yeah.
And letting a player score a goal and start running towards us, and only pressing the shutter when they were starting running towards us.
Yeah.
And it had got everything from him running up to shooting and kicking the ball and scoring the goal. Yeah. It is going to, for some people, it's going to be witchcraft and no, but I think you have to get real. Occasionally there is a certain situation where it's helpful. I mean, do I have it turned on the whole time? No. I literally, I have it turned on for my, again, my short lens 7200 football goal, because the reason I have it turned on is those extra frames occasionally are quite helpful. Sometimes you're a bit late to something. Sometimes you drop from 400 to 7200 a bit later than you wanted to. More often than not, you have multiple players cutting across in front of you. So say sometimes the first frame that you would have shot, a player has come across, they've not maybe obstructed the goal scorer, but they've obstructed the ball. Well, to me, a goal picture, if it doesn't have the ball in it, it's not a picture. I wouldn't send it.
No.
It needs, a goal picture needs the person who scored the goal in it and the ball in it. So if either of those two things are missing, blocked, obscured, or then it's not a usable picture.
It's all about assisting you.
And the thing is that in this particular camera, it's seamless as well. I think that's the other thing we may have missed there. It's totally seamless. Yeah. It's not
a weird format.
It's not a weird format. It's not a smaller file. It's not tucked away in some folder or whatever. It's just there on the card.
It's just a JPEG or your RAW, exactly the way you shoot normally.
Exactly,
yeah. Thank you, Richard. That was a very enlightening and great to talk to you as always.
That's an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for having me along.
Well, I hope you learned something about sports photography. I know I did. I'll see you next time for another Canon video.